At 68 years old, I thought I had already experienced every kind of humiliation life could offer a woman. I had buried my husband, worked through sickness, survived years of loneliness, endured the quiet invisibility that comes with growing older in a world obsessed with youth and success. But nothing prepared me for the moment my own son looked me in the eye and made me feel ashamed of being poor. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in a small apartment above an old tailoring shop on Abercorn Street. The building is old enough that the wooden floors creak with every step, and during heavy rainstorms, water leaks through the corner near the kitchen window, no matter how many times the landlord promises to fix it. Still, it was home. For 37 years, I worked as a seamstress. I repaired wedding dresses, adjusted expensive suits, hemmed uniforms, stitched curtains for wealthy homes, and spent most of my life bent over a sewing machine beneath yellow lamplight while the rest of the city slept. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest. The kind of work that leaves your hands sore and your back aching while giving you just enough pride to sleep peacefully at night. Every sacrifice I made had one purpose: my son, Nathan Whitmore, the boy I raised after my husband Daniel died in a construction accident when Nathan was only 8 years old. I still remember the night the police officer knocked on my door. The rain, the silence afterward, the way Nathan cried himself to sleep in my lap, asking when his father was coming home. That night changed everything. From that moment on, I stopped living for myself. Every decision became about survival and giving my son a future better than the one life had given me. I worked mornings at Henderson Tailoring downtown. At night, I took private sewing clients from wealthy neighborhoods across Savannah. Sometimes I barely slept for 3 hours. Sometimes my fingers bled through fabric from sewing so long. But whenever exhaustion threatened to break me, I looked at Nathan and kept going. Because mothers do impossible things when their children are dreaming. Nathan was brilliant from the very beginning. Smart, ambitious, driven. Teachers adored him. He graduated near the top of his class and later earned admission into Vanderbilt University's business program. The tuition nearly destroyed me financially, but I never let him see that. I sold jewelry, I worked extra hours, skipped meals for some months, and smiled through all of it because I wanted my son to believe his future was limitless. And perhaps that was my mistake. Maybe I protected him too well from the reality of sacrifice. Over the years, Nathan became successful, very successful. He moved into corporate finance, started working with major investment firms, and eventually partnered with one of the largest technology companies in Savannah. His world slowly transformed into luxury hotels, expensive dinners, networking events, and people who wore wealth like a second skin. At first, I was proud. Every mother would be. But little by little, something inside Nathan began changing. His phone calls became shorter. His visits became rare. And whenever he introduced me to colleagues or clients, I noticed something strange in his smile: embarrassment. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. After all, mothers always fear losing their children as they grow older. But deep down, I knew. The gap between our worlds was becoming too large. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Outside, summer rain tapped softly against the apartment windows, while I sat beside my sewing machine altering a blue evening gown for one of my regular clients. A woman named Mrs. Calloway who attended charity galas almost every month and always complained about tiny imperfections no one else could even see. My phone buzzed beside the fabric scissors. Nathan. Immediately, my face softened into a smile. No matter how old you become, hearing your child's name still touches something gentle inside your heart. Hello, sweetheart. His voice sounded distracted, rushed. Hey, Mom. I adjusted my glasses and leaned back in the chair. How are you? Busy, he answered quickly. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I waited quietly. This Friday is the Harrison Foundation Gala. I recognized the event immediately. Everyone in Savannah knew about the Harrison Foundation Gala. It was the biggest charity and corporate event of the year. Politicians attended, television crews covered it. Executives and investors flew in from all over the country. Nathan had mentioned it several times over the past month. His company had recently secured a partnership opportunity with Harrison Technologies. This is huge for my career, he kept saying. So hearing the excitement in his voice made me smile. That's wonderful, Nathan, I said warmly. Your father would have been so proud of you. There was silence on the line. Then he cleared his throat. Yeah, listen, Mom. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. I slowly set the needle and thread aside. Yes? I don't think it's a good idea for you to attend. For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard him. What? The gala, he said quickly. I don't think you should come. I frowned in confusion. I wasn't planning to bother you, sweetheart. I only thought maybe I could finally see one of your big events. That's exactly the problem. The words landed strangely, cold, sharp. I sat up straighter. I don't understand. He exhaled impatiently. Mom, these events are different. There are important people there, investors, executives, people who expect a certain image. I stared at the rain sliding down the window. What does that have to do with me? Another pause, longer this time. Then finally, you don't really fit into that environment. My chest tightened. Nathan, I'm trying to protect you from feeling uncomfortable. His voice sounded rehearsed now, like someone carefully managing a business conversation, not speaking to his mother. I can wear something nice, I whispered softly. That's not the point. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, harder to breathe in. Then he said the sentence that shattered something deep inside me. Mom, you're too poor for this kind of event. Silence. Complete silence. Outside, thunder rolled across Savannah. I gripped the edge of the sewing table to steady myself. For a moment, I could not even process the words. Too poor. Not too busy. Not inconvenient. Too poor. My own son was ashamed of me because I did not belong to his wealthy world. I swallowed hard. Nathan, do you hear yourself right now? You're taking this emotionally. A bitter laugh almost escaped my throat. Emotionally? What other way was a mother supposed to take humiliation from her own child? I just don't want people judging, he continued quickly. These events are about perception. Perception. Such a corporate word. Such a cold word. I looked around my apartment slowly, at the old curtains, the sewing machine, the stack of fabric beside the wall. Everything in that room existed because I had chosen Nathan over myself for decades. And suddenly, I felt ashamed, not from being poor, but of how completely I had allowed my entire life to revolve around someone capable of speaking to me this way. I should get back to work, I said quietly. Good, he replied with obvious relief. Then, before hanging up, he added, And Mom? Yes? Please don't come to the gala. The line disconnected. I remained frozen in the chair long after the call ended. The rain continued falling softly outside while my apartment sat wrapped in painful silence. Then slowly, I looked down at my hands. Wrinkled hands, rough hands, hands that spent nearly 40 years sewing clothes so my son could stand proudly inside rooms that now had no place for me. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if success had not made my son stronger, but smaller. After Nathan's phone call, I sat motionless beside the sewing machine for nearly 20 minutes. The rain kept falling outside. Cars passed slowly through the wet Savannah streets below my apartment. while the old wall clock above the kitchen sink ticked louder than usual. Funny how silence changes after heartbreak. It becomes heavier. Every sound suddenly feels distant, like life itself has stepped away from you. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My knees ached as they always did during rainy weather, and I pressed one hand against the edge of the table for support before walking toward the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of coffee that had already gone cold hours earlier. Still, I drank it anyway. I wasn't tasting anything anymore, only replaying Nathan's words over and over inside my mind. You're too poor for this kind of event. The sentence clung to me like smoke. I walked slowly toward the hallway mirror near my bedroom and stopped in front of it. An old woman stared back at me, silver streaks and carefully pinned curls, fine wrinkles around tired eyes, soft lines across my cheeks earned through decades of stress, sacrifice, and survival. But what hurt most was not aging. It was realizing my own son looked at me and saw embarrassment instead of love. I lowered my gaze. The cardigan I wore was faded near the sleeves from years of washing. Tiny sewing threads still clung to the fabric. Suddenly, I saw myself the way Nathan probably did: small, ordinary, poor. My chest tightened painfully. I turned away from the mirror before the tears could come. Crying changes nothing. Life had already taught me that lesson long ago. I returned to the sewing table and tried finishing Mrs. Calloway's gown, but my hands trembled too much to guide the needle properly. After ruining a stitch line twice, I finally gave up. Outside, the rain began easing into a soft drizzle. The apartment grew dim as evening settled across the city. I switched on the lamp beside the sofa, bathing the room in warm yellow light. That was when my eyes drifted toward the old cedar closet near the bedroom door. Daniel built that closet himself 32 years ago. I still remembered how proud he looked carrying the wooden panels upstairs, piece by piece, because we couldn't afford professional movers back then. This thing will outlive both of us, he joked. And somehow it almost was. Slowly, I walked toward it. The hinges creaked softly as I opened the doors. Inside hung the small collection of clothes I'd accumulated over the years. Simple dresses, church outfits, cardigans, practical things. Nothing luxurious. Nothing that belonged at a millionaire's gala. Yet as I moved hangers aside carefully, my fingers brushed against something hidden in the back, beneath a protective garment bag. I froze, then slowly pulled it forward. My navy blue evening dress. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. I had not worn that dress in nearly 11 years, not since Daniel and I attended a charity banquet hosted by the Savannah Historical Society before his death. Back then, Nathan had just started his corporate career. I remembered how proud Daniel looked introducing us to people that night. "This is my wife, Eleanor," he kept saying with a smile so full of love it made me blush even after 30 years of marriage. I carefully unzipped the garment bag. The fabric remained beautiful, dark navy silk with elegant stitching along the waist and sleeves. Simple, classy, timeless. I ran my fingers across it slowly. Memories flooded back all at once. Daniel helped zip the back. Nathan complimenting me before leaving for college. The music, the laughter, the years before money and status poisoned everything. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I quickly wiped my eyes before opening the apartment door. It was Mrs. Delgado from downstairs carrying a foil-covered plate. She was 74, widowed, and somehow knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. "I made too much chicken casserole again," she said warmly. "Thought you might want some." I smiled politely. "You always make too much on purpose." "Of course I do," she replied. Otherwise, who would keep you fed while you work yourself to death? Despite everything weighing on my heart, I laughed softly. She stepped inside and immediately noticed the dress draped across my arm. Well, now, she said with raised eyebrows. Where are we going? Nowhere. That's clearly a lie. I hesitated, then finally sighed. Nathan has a big gala Friday night. Oh, that fancy charity thing on television? I nodded. You should go. A bitter smile crossed my face. He doesn't want me there. Mrs. Delgado's expression changed instantly. What do you mean? I looked away toward the window. He said I wouldn't fit in. I could not bring myself to repeat the real words. Too poor. Even now they hurt too much. Mrs. Delgado stared at me in disbelief. That boy said that to you? He's under pressure, I said automatically. Mothers defend their children even while bleeding from wounds they caused. But Mrs. Delgado was not fooled. No, she said sharply. He's ashamed, and shame makes people cruel. The apartment fell quiet. Then she walked closer and touched the navy dress gently. You know what I think? What? I think you should wear this dress and attend that gala anyway. I shook my head immediately. No. Why not? Because Nathan asked me not to come. And since when does humiliation deserve obedience? Her words struck harder than she probably intended. I sat slowly on the sofa. I don't belong in places like that anymore. Mrs. Delgado crossed her arms. Eleanor Whitmore, you spent nearly 40 years dressing rich women for events exactly like this one. Half the city's wealthy wives wore clothes altered by your hands. That's different. No, it isn't. I looked down quietly. Deep inside, something painful stirred. Not anger, not yet. Something else. A small, wounded piece of pride trying desperately to survive. Mrs. Delgado sat beside me more gently now. You know what wealthy people fear most? She asked softly. What? Being reminded where they came from. I thought about Nathan as a little boy sitting beside me at the kitchen table while I patched school uniforms late into the night. I remembered him promising, one day I'll buy you a big house, Mom. Back then, he sounded so sincere, so loving. What happened to that boy? Mrs. Delgado squeezed my hand. You raised a successful man, she said, but don't let his success convince you that your life has less value. My throat tightened. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, almost without thinking, I asked, do you really think I could still wear this dress? She looked at me like the answer was obvious. Oh, honey, she smiled warmly. That dress isn't the question. What is? Whether you still remember who you are. After she left later that evening, I stood alone in my bedroom, holding the navy dress against myself while staring into the mirror again. This time, I didn't see poverty. I saw survival. And somewhere deep inside me, for the first time since Nathan's phone call, something began waking up. Friday arrived hot and heavy with summer humidity. By late afternoon, Savannah glowed beneath golden sunlight, while expensive cars moved steadily through downtown streets toward the Grand Atlantic Hotel. All day long, I argued with myself about whether I should go. One moment I felt determined, the next humiliated. Several times I even picked up the phone to call Nathan and tell him he had nothing to worry about, because I would stay home exactly where he wanted me. But every time I tried, something inside me resisted. Not anger, not revenge, something quieter, dignity. Around 5 o'clock, I carefully laid the navy dress across my bed and stared at it in silence. The fabric looked almost fragile beneath the bedroom light. So many years had passed since I last wore it. Back then, Daniel was still alive. Nathan still hugged me goodbye before leaving the house. Life still felt simple. I slowly changed clothes. The zipper caught slightly halfway up my back, and for a brief moment, panic rushed through me. Maybe the dress no longer fits. Maybe I no longer fit into the woman I used to be. After several attempts, I finally managed to pull it closed. Then I stood before the mirror. The woman staring back looked older, yes. Wrinkles framed her mouth. Silver touched her curls. Time had softened her body and slowed her movements. But she also looked elegant, graceful, strong in a quiet way the world often overlooks. I reached for the pearl earrings Daniel gave me during our 25th wedding anniversary. Every queen deserves pearls, he whispered while fastening them himself that night. The memory almost broke me. I pressed trembling fingers against the earrings for a moment before taking a deep breath. Then the doorbell rang. It was Gloria. The second she saw me, her eyes widened. Well, she smiled warmly. Look at you. I laughed nervously. I feel ridiculous. You look powerful. She stepped inside carrying a small makeup bag. Sit down. Gloria, no arguments. 20 minutes later, she had lightly touched up my makeup and adjusted my hair while giving strict instructions the entire time. Shoulders back. Stop apologizing with your posture. And for heaven's sake, don't let rich people make you feel invisible. I laughed despite myself. But beneath the laughter, fear remained. What if Nathan gets angry? Gloria stopped brushing powder across my cheek, then quietly asked, and what if you spend the rest of your life regretting not standing up for yourself? The apartment grew silent, because deep down, I already knew the answer. At 6:40 p.m., a taxi arrived downstairs. As I stepped outside, warm evening air wrapped around the city. Savannah looked beautiful at sunset. Historic buildings glowed beneath golden light. Palm trees swayed softly. The smell of rain still lingered faintly from earlier storms. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror while pulling away from the curb. Big night? I smiled politely. Something like that. Traffic thickened as we approached downtown. Luxury cars filled the streets near the Grand Atlantic Hotel. Valets rushed between entrances while camera flashes sparkled beneath towering chandeliers visible through the glass front doors. Suddenly, my confidence disappeared. The hotel looked enormous, elegant, intimidating. People stepped from black SUVs wearing designer gowns and tailored tuxedos worth more than my yearly rent. I looked down at my hands, resting quietly in my lap. Rough hands, seamstress hands. For a brief moment, Nathan's words returned. You're too poor for this kind of event. My chest tightened painfully again. The taxi stopped near the entrance. You sure this is the place? The driver asked gently. I nodded slowly. Yes. But truthfully, I wasn't sure at all. The doorman opened the car door as flashes from nearby photographers reflected across the marble entrance. I stepped out carefully, clutching my small navy handbag tighter than necessary. Immediately, insecurity washed over me. Women passed wearing diamonds. Men laughed beside politicians and executives. Everything smelled of expensive perfume and polished luxury. I almost turned around right there. But before I could retreat, the doorman smiled politely. Invitation, ma'am? My fingers trembled slightly as I handed over the printed QR code from my purse. He scanned it, then suddenly straightened. His entire expression changed. Welcome, Ms. Whitmore. Respect entered his voice immediately. Not forced politeness, genuine respect. This way, please. Confused, I followed him through the grand entrance into the ballroom lobby. The space took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers floated overhead like glowing stars. White roses decorated towering centerpieces. Soft piano music drifted across polished marble floors. People moved gracefully through the room holding champagne glasses while photographers captured smiling executives near enormous sponsor banners. For a moment, I truly felt invisible, like I had wandered accidentally into someone else's world. Then I saw him, Nathan, standing near the center of the ballroom in a black tuxedo tailored perfectly to his athletic frame. Confidence, successful, polished. Beside him stood Vanessa Caldwell, tall, beautiful, elegant in a silver gown that shimmered beneath the ballroom lights. Her father, Richard Caldwell, stood nearby, speaking with two businessmen while Vanessa laughed softly beside Nathan. They looked perfect together, like one of those wealthy couples featured in magazines near grocery store checkout lines. And suddenly, I understood exactly why my son didn't want me there, because I disrupted the image. Nathan noticed me almost immediately. The smile vanished from his face so quickly it startled me. His entire body stiffened. Then he rushed toward me through the crowd. Mom? People nearby turned curiously. I remained calm. Good evening, Nathan. His eyes darted nervously around the ballroom. What are you doing here? The hurt in his voice wasn't emotional. I panicked. I came to support my son. I told you not to come. Several nearby guests pretended not to listen while very clearly listening. My face warmed with humiliation. Still, I kept my voice steady. I received an invitation. His expression changed instantly. What? I slowly handed him the printed email. He scanned it quickly. Confusion spread across his face, then fear. Before he could respond, Vanessa approached wearing a strained smile. Eleanor, she said politely, we weren't expecting you tonight. Of course they weren't. Nathan lowered his voice sharply. Mom, maybe we should talk outside. Why? Because this isn't the place for a scene. A scene. As though my mere presence was chaos. I stared at my son quietly, and for the first time in my life, I did not see the little boy I raised, but a stranger was terrified of where he came from. Before I could answer, the ballroom lights suddenly dimmed. Conversations quieted instantly. A spotlight illuminated the massive stage near the center of the room. Then a voice echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the CEO of Harrison Technologies, Mr. Charles Harrison. Thunderous applause filled the ballroom. Nathan immediately straightened his posture beside me. Everyone in Savannah knew Charles Harrison, billionaire, philanthropist, one of the most powerful businessmen in the state. An older man with silver hair and calm authority stepped onto the stage beneath the lights. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. Then finally, Charles Harrison smiled warmly toward the audience. Thank you all for joining us tonight. His voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom. He spoke briefly about community programs, technology initiatives, and the importance of leadership. Nathan visibly relaxed while listening. This was his world: corporate language, powerful people, controlled appearances. Then suddenly, Charles Harrison paused mid sentence. His eyes moved slowly across the ballroom crowd and stopped directly on me. At first, I assumed I was imagining it, but then his expression changed completely. Surprise, recognition, warmth. A slow smile crossed his face. Well, now, he said softly into the microphone. The ballroom quieted further. I was hoping you would come tonight. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. My heart began pounding. Charles Harrison stepped closer to the edge of the stage while still staring directly at me. Eleanor Whitmore, he announced clearly. Every head in the ballroom turned. Nathan's face drained of color beside me, and then came the sentence that changed everything. Would you please join me on stage? The room froze, completely frozen. Nathan stared at me in horror. Vanessa looked utterly confused, and I suddenly realized the night was about to become something none of us expected. The ballroom stood completely silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me as Charles Harrison remained at the edge of the stage waiting. For a brief moment, I genuinely believed there had been some terrible mistake. Nathan certainly looked like he believed that. His face had gone pale beneath the ballroom lights. Sir, he said quickly with a nervous laugh, I think there's been confusion. But Charles Harrison ignored him completely. Instead, the billionaire CEO stepped down from the stage himself. The room buzzed with whispers as he walked directly toward me, toward the woman my own son had called too poor to belong there. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. When Charles finally reached me, his expression softened warmly. Eleanor Whitmore, he said gently. Then something unbelievable happened. He took both of my hands, not politely, not for show, with genuine affection. And suddenly, memories I had not touched in decades flickered faintly inside my mind. You remember me? I whispered. Charles laughed softly. Remember you? His eyes glistened beneath the chandelier lights. Ma'am, I wouldn't be standing here without you. The ballroom erupted into confused murmurs. Nathan stared at us like the floor had vanished beneath his feet. Vanessa looked completely lost. I could barely breathe. Charles carefully guided me toward the stage, while photographers rushed closer to capture the moment. As we walked, Nathan stepped forward again. Mr. Harrison, he said tightly, my mother used to work as a seamstress. Charles stopped walking. Very slowly, he turned toward Nathan. His expression remained calm, but disappointment lingered beneath it now. Yes, he answered evenly. And that seamstress once saved my entire company. The ballroom went silent again. Even the piano music had stopped. I stood frozen beside him as old memories returned more clearly now. 35 years earlier, a younger Charles Harrison arrived at the tailoring shop where I worked, carrying boxes filled with damaged hotel uniforms. Back then, he wasn't famous, wasn't wealthy. He looked exhausted, desperate, terrified of failure. He had secured a contract with 3 luxury hotels, but the manufacturing company producing the uniforms abandoned the order at the last minute. Without those uniforms, he would lose everything. I remembered the panic in his eyes, and perhaps because I knew what desperation looked like after Daniel died, I agreed to help. Charles slowly led me onto the stage before turning back toward the audience. Most people in this ballroom know me as the founder of Harrison Technologies, he began calmly into the microphone. But very few know how close I came to losing everything before this company ever existed. The audience listened carefully now. When I was 29 years old, I signed my first major hospitality contract. Deliver custom uniforms for 3 Savannah luxury resorts in under 2 weeks. He smiled faintly. Unfortunately, the factory responsible disappeared with half the payment. Soft laughter spread nervously through the ballroom. I was ruined. Charles turned toward me. Then someone gave me the name Eleanor Whitmore. I lowered my eyes modestly while cameras flashed around us. She worked in a tiny tailoring shop downtown, he continued. No employees, no investors, no corporate support. Then his voice softened. Just discipline, talent, and a work ethic stronger than anyone I had ever met. The ballroom remained completely still. I remembered those nights now, working until sunrise, drinking coffee to stay awake, sewing until my fingers cramped painfully. Because back then, failure for Charles would have destroyed everything he dreamed of building. And somehow, I understood that feeling deeply. Charles smiled gently. She stayed awake almost 4 straight nights helping complete those uniforms. A few gasps spread through the crowd, and when I admitted I couldn't fully pay her immediately, he paused. She trusted me anyway. Nathan stared at me in disbelief, as though he were seeing an entirely different woman than the one he believed embarrassed his perfect image. Charles looked toward the audience again. That hotel contract became the foundation of Harrison Technologies. Applause began slowly, then grew louder. And later, Charles continued, when my company finally became profitable, I offered Eleanor shares in the business instead of delayed payment. I remembered that conversation clearly now. A tiny office, cheap coffee, young ambition burning brightly in Charles's eyes. But she refused, he said. The ballroom quieted again. Charles smiled warmly toward me. She told me something I have never forgotten. Then, unexpectedly, he handed me the microphone. My hands trembled instantly. The ballroom waited silently. I I don't remember exactly, I admitted nervously. Charles chuckled softly. Yes, you do. And suddenly, I did. I swallowed hard before speaking quietly into the microphone. Success matters very little if it costs your kindness. The entire ballroom froze. Even Nathan looked stunned. Charles nodded slowly. That sentence shaped how I built this company. The audience burst into applause again, but this time it sounded different. Not polite applause, respectful applause, real applause. For the first time all evening, I no longer felt invisible. Charles looked back toward the ballroom crowd. And when I learned earlier this week that Eleanor Whitmore was attending tonight, his eyes shifted briefly toward Nathan. I personally added her to the honored guest list. Nathan's face lost all remaining color. Charles continued calmly, because no company should celebrate success without honoring the people who quietly helped build it. The room exploded into applause, so loud it echoed across the chandeliers. People stood, executives, investors, politicians, standing for the poor seamstress my own son believed did not belong there. My eyes filled with tears instantly, not because of humiliation anymore, but because for the first time in years, someone saw my life, saw my sacrifices, saw my worth. And suddenly, the shame no longer belonged to me. It belonged to Nathan. After the applause finally faded, the ballroom transformed completely. Only minutes earlier, I had entered that room feeling invisible. Now, suddenly, people surrounded me from every direction. Executives shook my hand warmly. Women complimented my dress. Investors asked questions about the early days of Harrison Technologies. It felt surreal, almost unreal. The same wealthy world my son believed would reject me was now treating me with more respect than he had shown me in years. Charles Harrison stayed close beside me throughout most of it, not in a performative way, protectively, as though he sensed how overwhelmed I felt. You all right? He asked quietly at one point. I smiled faintly. I think so. But truthfully, my emotions were tangled into something impossible to describe. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt deeply sad, because none of this recognition would erase the fact that my own son had been ashamed of me only an hour earlier. Across the ballroom, Nathan stood stiffly beside Vanessa near one of the sponsor tables. People still approached him, but something had changed. The confidence he wore earlier now looked fragile, forced. I noticed several executives glancing toward him differently. not cruelly, curiously, as though they were trying to understand how a man connected to Eleanor Whitmore could have behaved the way he did. And Nathan noticed it too. You could see it in his posture, the nervous adjusting of his cufflinks, the fake smiles, the constant scanning of the room. For the first time in a long time, my son looked insecure. Eventually, dinner service began. Large crystal chandeliers glowed warmly above the ballroom, while waiters moved gracefully between tables, carrying silver trays and wine glasses. I expected to quietly return to some distant corner table alone. Instead, one of the event coordinators approached nervously. "Miss Whitmore?" "Yes?" "Mr. Harrison would like you seated at the head table." I froze. The head table? "Yes, ma'am." My eyes immediately found Nathan across the room. His expression darkened instantly. Of course it did. The head table was reserved for corporate executives, major investors, politicians, and honored guests, not seamstresses from old apartments above tailoring shops. But before I could protest, Charles appeared beside me again. "You belong there more than most people in this room," he said gently. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded. The ballroom lights softened as guests settled into their seats, and then I saw exactly where I had been placed, directly beside Charles Harrison, directly across from Nathan and Vanessa. For several painful seconds, nobody spoke. Vanessa focused intensely on unfolding her napkin. Nathan stared down at the wine glass in front of him. The tension surrounding the table felt almost physical. Finally, Charles broke the silence. "So, Nathan," he said calmly, "your mother tells me you've been doing impressive work with the new investment division." Nathan forced a smile. "Thank you, sir. She must be very proud." Nathan glanced toward me briefly. "Yes, of course." I said nothing, because pride was far more complicated than that now. Dinner began with lobster bisques served in delicate porcelain bowls. Normally, I would have felt uncomfortable around so much luxury, but strangely, I no longer did. Not after hearing Charles speak about my work in front of the entire ballroom. Not after realizing my value never depended on expensive rooms or wealthy opinions. Still, beneath the surface calm, I could feel Nathan unraveling. Every time someone approached our table to praise me, his discomfort deepened. One older investor leaned toward me warmly. "Ms. Whitmore, your story reminded me of my own mother. Women like you built this country quietly." Nathan visibly flinched, because each compliment toward me became another reminder of his own behavior. Then came the moment that truly shattered him. A local television reporter approached the table carrying a microphone. "Mr. Harrison," she smiled professionally, "would you mind if we asked a few questions for the evening segment?" "Of course," Charles replied. The reporter turned toward me. "And Ms. Whitmore, viewers would love hearing more about your connection to Harrison Technologies." Nathan immediately interrupted. "My mother isn't comfortable with interviews." I looked at him slowly and calmly answered the reporter myself. "It's all right." Nathan's jaw tightened. The reporter smiled warmly. "Ms. Whitmore, how does it feel seeing the company you helped support become so successful?" For a moment, I thought carefully before answering, then quietly said, "It feels less important than seeing what success turns people into." The entire table went silent. Nathan looked like someone had punched him in the chest. The reporter blinked slightly, sensing deeper meaning beneath the sentence. Charles Harrison remained very still beside me. Vanessa lowered her eyes toward her plate, and suddenly, the truth hanging over the table became impossible to ignore. The reporter thanked us politely and moved away, but the damage had already been done. Nathan leaned toward me sharply once she left. Mom, he whispered tensely, what are you doing? I met his eyes calmly. The better question is, what are you doing, Nathan? You're making this worse. No, I answered softly. I think the truth is simply becoming harder to hide. His face reddened instantly. Vanessa finally spoke for the first time in nearly 15 minutes. Maybe everyone should calm down. Her voice sounded uneasy, because even she was beginning to understand something uncomfortable. Nathan's shame had never truly been about money. It was about identity, about pretending he had completely escaped the life he came from. Charles quietly placed his napkin beside his plate, then looked directly at Nathan. You know, he said evenly, the strongest leaders I've ever known were never ashamed of humble beginnings. Nathan swallowed hard. Charles continued calmly. In fact, most truly successful people wear their struggles with pride. The silence afterward felt unbearable, because everyone at that table understood exactly what he meant. Nathan pushed back slightly from the table. I need some air. Without waiting for a response, he stood and walked quickly toward the ballroom terrace. Danusa hesitated before following him. I watched them disappear through the glass doors while something heavy settled inside my chest. Not satisfied, not revenge, just grief. Because no matter how much public recognition I received tonight, nothing could erase the pain of realizing my own son believed success required erasing me too. The ballroom terrace overlooked the Savannah River. Warm night air drifted across the water while distant music from inside the gala echoed softly behind the glass doors. Nathan stood near the railing with both hands gripping the marble edge tightly. Vanessa remained beside him, speaking quietly, though from where I sat inside, I couldn't hear the words. But I could read body language, and tension radiated from both of them. Charles Harrison slowly sipped his wine beside me. Then, without looking directly at me, he asked softly, did Nathan ever tell you why he became so obsessed with status? I frowned slightly. No. Charles nodded as though he expected that answer. Then he leaned back calmly in his chair. About 6 years ago, Nathan attended a fundraising dinner hosted by the Caldwell family, the Ness's family. Old money, powerful connections. The kind of people who treated social status like royalty. Charles continued quietly. One of the investors asked Nathan where he came from. My chest tightened already. And Nathan answered proudly at first. He talked about Savannah, about growing up modestly, about being raised by a hard-working mother. I listened carefully. Then someone made a joke. Charles paused, a cruel joke. The ballroom noise faded around me. What kind of joke? Charles sighed softly. One of the guests asked if his mother still repaired clothes for rich people out of a tiny apartment. My stomach twisted. He said it in front of everyone, Charles continued, and several people laughed. Outside on the terrace, Nathan lowered his head while Vanessa spoke to him quietly. Charles stared thoughtfully through the ballroom windows. That night changed something inside your son. I remained silent, because deep down, I already knew that. He became obsessed with proving he belonged among wealthy people, Charles explained. New suits, luxury cars, exclusive memberships, expensive dinners. Charles looked toward me gently, and eventually he started seeing his own past as weakness instead of strength. Pain settled heavily inside my chest. Not because strangers mocked me, but because Nathan allowed their opinions to redefine his love. He never told me any of this, I whispered. He was ashamed, Charles answered quietly. I laughed bitterly. Yes, I noticed. Charles finally turned fully toward me. But shame grows in silence, Eleanor, especially in people trying desperately to escape themselves. Before I could answer, the terrace doors opened sharply. Nathan stepped back inside alone. Vanessa remained outside, staring at the river. My son's face looked exhausted now. Not angry anymore, just worn down. Charles stood calmly. I'll give you two some privacy. As he walked away, he squeezed my shoulder gently. Then suddenly it was just me and Nathan standing near the head table beneath soft ballroom lights. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Nathan sat heavily across from me. You must think I'm pathetic. I looked at him carefully, and for the first time that night, I saw fear underneath the expensive suit. Real fear. I think you're lost, I answered softly. He stared down at his hands. When people laughed at me that night, he began quietly, I felt 14 years old again. The ballroom buzzed around us while his voice remained low and fragile. I hated how small they made me feel. I listened silently, so I changed everything. His eyes moved slowly around the luxurious ballroom. The clothes, the car, the apartment, the networking, the image. Then he swallowed hard, and eventually, I convinced myself I had to erase anything that reminded people where I came from. A painful silence settled between us. You mean me, I whispered. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. Yes, the honesty hurt more than excuses somehow, because at least excuses pretend there was no intention. This this was deliberate. I spent my whole life trying to protect you from feeling ashamed, I said quietly. I know. No, Nathan, I don't think you do. My voice trembled slightly now, despite trying to remain calm. When your classmates had expensive shoes, I worked extra weekends so you wouldn't feel different. He looked down immediately. When you wanted tutoring, I skipped meals for a few months to afford it. His jaw tightened. And when Vanderbilt accepted you, my throat burned suddenly. I sold Daniel's wedding ring because financial aid wasn't enough. Nathan looked up sharply. What? I nodded slowly. You thought your father's insurance covered everything. It didn't. His face lost all remaining color. Mom. There were nights I slept sitting beside that sewing machine because I physically couldn't walk to bed after working. Emotion thickened in my throat, but I never regretted any of it. Not once. Nathan stared at me like he was seeing an entirely different woman. Because perhaps he was. Children rarely understand the full humanity of their parents until much later in life, sometimes too late. I never wanted you carrying the burden of our struggles, I continued softly. I wanted you to believe your future was limitless. Nathan's eyes filled slowly with tears. Real tears, not polished emotions, broken ones. And instead, I whispered painfully, you learned to hate the very life that gave you everything. The silence afterward felt unbearable. Across the ballroom, wealthy guests laughed beneath chandeliers while live piano music floated softly through the air. Yet suddenly none of it mattered. Not luxury, not the status, not the image. Only the truth remained. Nathan wiped his face quickly, embarrassed by his emotions, then quietly asked, do you know the worst part? I waited. I spent years becoming successful. His voice cracked, and tonight was the first time I realized how poor I actually became. Those words settled deep inside me, because for the first time all evening, my son finally sounded honest. The gala ended shortly after midnight. Guests slowly filtered out beneath the glow of chandeliers, while hotel staff cleared glasses and folded linens around the ballroom. Outside, Savannah shimmered beneath warm streetlights and damp pavement from an earlier drizzle. Nathan insisted on driving me home. At first, I almost refused. Part of me wanted silence, distance, time to process everything that had happened. But another part of me understood something important. Tonight, my son had cracked something open inside my son. And if I walked away too quickly, that opening might close again. The ride through downtown Savannah felt painfully quiet. Nathan kept both hands tight on the steering wheel while jazz music played softly through the speakers. The expensive Mercedes smelled faintly of leather and cologne, a world away from the tiny apartment where I spent decades sewing clothes to pay for his future. Finally, halfway across Bay Street, Nathan spoke quietly. I never thought Charles Harrison even remembered you. I stared out the window at glowing storefronts passing by. That's because you never asked about my life. The words were calm, not cruel, but they landed hard anyway. Nathan swallowed. You're right. Silence returned. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed once, a hollow laugh filled with disbelief. You know what's strange? What? All these years, I kept trying to impress people like Charles Harrison. He shook his head slowly. And tonight he respected you more than anyone in that ballroom. I said nothing, because deep down, I think he already understood why. Real respect cannot be purchased. It's earned quietly over time. When we finally reached my apartment building, Nathan parked the car but didn't move. The engine idled softly beneath the yellow streetlights. I used to be proud of where I came from, he admitted suddenly. I looked toward him carefully. When I was younger, I used to tell people about you constantly. His eyes stayed fixed ahead. I told everyone my mom could make anything with her hands. Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside my chest. I remember one school project, he continued softly. Kids had to describe a hero. He smiled bitterly. I wrote about you. For a moment, neither of us moved. The memory hit me instantly. Nathan at 10 years old, standing proudly in the kitchen, reading his paper aloud, while Daniel clapped dramatically from the table. My mom works harder than anyone in the world, he had written. I closed my eyes briefly. What happened to that boy? I whispered. Nathan's jaw tightened painfully. I think, he said slowly, I got tired of feeling less than everyone else. The honesty in his voice felt different tonight. Not defensive, broken. I spent so many years trying to become accepted by wealthy people that eventually I started seeing everything from my old life as weakness. His voice lowered further. Even you. That sentence hurt deeply, but at least now it came wrapped in truth instead of arrogance. Nathan finally turned toward me fully. I need you to know something. I waited quietly. When I told people you were gone, his eyes filled with shame immediately. I hated myself every single time. A sharp ache moved through my chest. Then why keep doing it? Because after the first lie, I didn't know how to undo it. Outside, rain began falling lightly again against the windshield. Nathan laughed bitterly. Can you imagine how pathetic that sounds? I looked at him carefully, and suddenly, I no longer saw the polished corporate man from the ballroom. I saw the frightened boy underneath all the expensive layers. The boy was terrified of rejection. The boy is desperate to belong somewhere. The boy who lost himself trying to outrun shame. But understanding pain does not erase damage, and some wounds take longer to heal than others. I don't know how to trust you right now, I admitted honestly. Nathan nodded immediately. You shouldn't. That answer surprised me, because for once, he wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. He simply accepted responsibility. We sat quietly for another minute before I reached for the door handle. Then Nathan spoke again. Mom? I turned back. There's something else you don't know. His expression shifted uneasily. What? Vanessa's father, Richard Caldwell, the wealthy real estate developer who always looked at me like I was invisible. What about him? Nathan exhaled slowly. He never approved of me. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He thought I came from the wrong background. The irony almost made me laugh. Nathan continued quietly. He told Vanessa years ago that marrying someone from a poor family would damage their reputation. I stared at him silently. And instead of defending your family, I said softly, you tried to erase us. Nathan lowered his eyes. Yes, the honesty hurt more than excuses ever could, because now there was nowhere left to hide. No misunderstandings, no confusion, no corporate image management, only the truth. Rainwater slid slowly across the windshield while distant thunder rolled somewhere near the river. Finally, Nathan whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I became the exact kind of person Dad would have hated. That sentence broke something inside me. Because Daniel valued dignity more than wealth, character more than status. And Nathan knew that. We both did. I looked at my son carefully beneath the soft dashboard light. Tired eyes, expensive suit, perfect haircut. And underneath all of it, a deeply unhappy man. Success had given him money, but it had stolen his peace. Nathan, I said softly. He looked at me immediately. You don't need wealthy people to validate your worth. His eyes filled again. You taught me that once. A sad smile crossed my face. Yes, and then I forgot. The rain grew heavier outside. Finally, I opened the car door slowly. But before stepping out, I turned back one last time. You know what hurts most? Nathan swallowed hard. What? Not that you were ashamed of me. My voice trembled slightly now. It's that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing the beauty in where you came from. Tears rolled silently down his face, and for the first time all night, my son looked truly poor. 3 weeks passed after the gala. 3 quiet, uncomfortable, emotionally exhausting weeks. Nathan called almost every day. At first, our conversations were awkward and painfully careful. He no longer sounded like the polished businessman from the gala. The sharp corporate tone had disappeared. Now he sounded uncertain. Humans. Sometimes he called just to ask whether I had eaten dinner. Sometimes he asked about my arthritis when the weather changed. Once, he even asked if I still made peach cobbler the way I used to when he was little. Small things, ordinary things. But after years of distance, those ordinary things felt enormous. Still, trust does not rebuild overnight. Some wounds close slowly, and some words never fully disappear. You're too poor for this kind of event. Even weeks later, that sentence still echoed quietly inside me when the apartment grew silent at night. One Thursday morning, while hemming a church dress near the window, my phone rang. Charles Harrison. I frowned in surprise before answering. Good morning. Eleanor, his warm voice replied immediately. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. I have a favor to ask. I leaned back slowly in my chair. What kind of favor? Charles hesitated briefly. Next month, Harrison Technologies is hosting its annual leadership conference. I listened quietly. Executives from all over the country will attend. Young employees, interns, investors. He paused. And I would like you to speak. I nearly dropped the measuring tape in my hand. Speak? Yes. I laughed nervously. Oh no, absolutely not. Charles chuckled softly. That's exactly what I expected you to say. I'm serious. I don't know anything about public speaking. You know more about leadership than most executives I've ever hired. I shook my head instinctively, even though he couldn't see me. I'm just a seamstress. No, Charles answered firmly. You are the woman who taught me that success without kindness is failure. The apartment fell quiet. Then he added gently, "People need to hear that, Eleanor." After we hung up, I sat staring at the sewing machine for a very long time. Public speaking terrified me. I had spent most of my life invisible by choice. Quiet women survive by staying unnoticed. But something about Charles's request stayed with me. Maybe because deep down, I knew this was about more than a speech. It was about voice, about finally allowing myself to exist fully after years of shrinking to make others comfortable. That evening, Nathan came by the apartment carrying groceries. Another new habit. Before the gala, he rarely visited unless absolutely necessary. Now he shows up almost every other evening. At first, I suspected guilt motivated him. Maybe part of it did. But over time, something softer began returning between us. Something honest. He unpacked vegetables onto the kitchen counter while talking about work, then casually asked, "How was your day?" I studied him quietly for a moment. Such a simple question, yet for years he had stopped asking. Charles Harrison called. Nathan immediately looked up. What did he want? He asked me to speak at the leadership conference next month. Nathan froze completely. He wants you to do what? I smiled nervously. Exactly my reaction. But Nathan didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned against the counter, staring at me thoughtfully. You should do it. I blinked in surprise. You think so? Yes. He hesitated briefly before continuing. People need to hear your story. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, because for the first time in years, my son sounded proud of me again. A painful warmth moved through my chest. I wouldn't even know what to say. Nathan smiled faintly. Mom, you've spent your entire life teaching people things without realizing it. The apartment grew quiet. Then softly, almost embarrassed, he added, You taught me too. I just forgot for a while. That night, after Nathan left, I sat beside the window watching rain slide gently down the glass. Savannah looked peaceful beneath the streetlights. And for the first time in many years, it wasn't solid. The conference arrived faster than expected. The Harrison Technologies auditorium was enormous. Rows of executives filled the seats while giant screens displayed the company logo behind the stage. I nearly turned around and left twice before entering. My hands shook with nerves. The elegant navy dress fits slightly loose now, perhaps because stress had taken weight from me these past weeks, or perhaps because I no longer carried the same heaviness inside. Charles greeted me warmly backstage. You ready? Not even slightly. He laughed. That usually means the speech matters. Nathan stood nearby in a dark suit, but something about him looked different now. Softer, less performative, more real. When our eyes met, he smiled nervously. You'll be amazing. I almost laughed at the irony. Weeks earlier, my son believed I would embarrass him by standing in front of wealthy people. Now he looked proud just seeing me there. The auditorium lights dimmed. Charles walked onto the stage first to thunderous applause. He gave a brief speech about leadership, integrity, and company culture. Then his expression warmed. There is someone very special I'd like you all to hear from today. My heartbeat thundered inside my chest. Charles smiled toward the side stage. A woman who taught me one of the most important lessons of my life long before this company ever existed. The large screen behind him displayed an old photograph. Me, 30 years younger, standing beside sewing machines in the tiny tailoring shop downtown. Soft murmurs spread through the audience. Then Charles said the sentence that made my throat tighten instantly. She reminded me that success means nothing if it costs your humanity. The auditorium applauded warmly. Then Charles extended his hand toward me. and once again, just like at the gala, the CEO handed me the microphone. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I walked slowly onto the stage beneath hundreds of lights while the audience applauded politely. My eyes searched the crowd until they found Nathan sitting in the front row. And suddenly, I realized something powerful. For years, I had allowed other people's opinions to decide my value, my poverty, my age, my quiet life. All things society treats like invisibility. But standing there now, I no longer felt invisible. I lifted the microphone gently. The auditorium became silent. Then softly, honestly, I began. I spent most of my life believing quiet sacrifice was enough. The auditorium remained completely silent after my final sentence. I spent most of my life believing quiet sacrifice was enough. I stood beneath the bright stage lights, gripping the microphone gently, while hundreds of people watched. For a moment, fear tried returning. But then I looked toward Nathan sitting in the front row, and instead of shame in his eyes, I saw tears. Real tears. Not hidden, not controlled, honest ones. I took a slow breath and continued. I spent decades sewing clothes for people who never learned my name. The audience listened carefully. I raised my son alone after losing my husband. I worked long nights. I sacrificed things quietly because that's what many parents do. My voice softened, and somewhere along the way, I began believing my value existed only in what I gave to others. The auditorium stayed still enough to hear breathing. But growing older has taught me something important. I looked slowly across the crowd. Human dignity should never depend on wealth, status, beauty, or power. Several people nodded quietly. We live in a world that teaches people to admire success loudly while ignoring sacrifice quietly. My throat tightened slightly. But some of the strongest people you will ever meet are not standing on stages. I thought about factory workers, single parents, teachers, nurses, janitors, grandparents raising children again. People society often overlooks while depending on them completely. They are sitting in tiny apartments paying bills they barely afford. They are working double shifts. They are carrying families on tired shoulders while nobody applauds them. The room grew emotional now. I could feel it. And yet, I continued softly, those people still wake up every morning and keep loving anyway. A woman near the front wiped tears from her eyes. I glanced toward Nathan again before saying the words that had lived inside my heart for weeks. Sometimes success convinces people they must erase where they came from. Nathan lowered his eyes immediately. But real success, I said firmly, is being able to rise without abandoning the people who helped lift you. The applause began softly. Then I grew stronger. But I wasn't finished. I looked directly at the younger employees filling the auditorium. Never become so important that you lose your kindness. Never become so wealthy that you look down on struggle. And never become so obsessed with an image that you forget who loved you before you had anything. By now, many people were openly emotional. Even Charles Harrison stood near the side stage, watching quietly with pride in his eyes. I swallowed hard before speaking one final truth. For years, I allowed myself to feel small because my life looked ordinary. The microphone trembled slightly in my hands. But ordinary people build this world. Thunderous applause erupted instantly. Not polite applause, not corporate applause, human applause. People rose from their seats across the auditorium. Standing ovation. The sound filled every corner of the room. And suddenly, at 68 years old, I finally understood something life had tried teaching me for decades. My worth had never been small. I had simply spent too many years surrounded by people who forgot how to see it. The standing ovation continued long after I stepped away from the microphone. When I finally exited the stage, Nathan was already waiting backstage. His eyes were red. His face looked emotionally exhausted. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then suddenly, my son hugged me. Not the quick, formal hugs wealthy people exchange at family events. A real hug. Tight, shaking, desperate. "I'm sorry," he whispered brokenly against my shoulder. The pain in his voice almost shattered me. "I know," I whispered softly. He pulled back, wiping his face quickly, embarrassed by his emotions. "I spent years chasing respect from strangers," he admitted painfully, "and almost destroyed the relationship that mattered most." I looked at him quietly. "You were trying to outrun shame." Nathan nodded slowly, but the shame was never where I thought it was. For the first time in many years, my son truly understood. Weeks later, changes began happening slowly. Not dramatic movie style transformations, real ones, difficult ones. Nathan sold the luxury condo downtown and moved into a smaller home. He stopped obsessing over elite social circles. He started visiting regularly without needing guilt or obligation as motivation. Some Sundays, we cooked dinner together while old jazz music played softly through the apartment. Sometimes we talked about Daniel for hours. Sometimes we sat quietly watching rain through the windows. Healing does not happen all at once, but little by little, we found our way back to each other. Vanessa changed too. To my surprise, she began visiting occasionally. One afternoon, she confessed something quietly while helping me fold laundry. "I think I cared too much about appearances, too." I smiled faintly. We all lose ourselves sometimes. Even Richard Caldwell eventually softened after the conference speech spread online. Ironically, the wealthy businessman who once viewed me as socially embarrassing later donated heavily to several community sewing programs after public praise for my story exploded across Savannah. Life has a strange sense of humor, but perhaps the biggest change happened inside me. Before the gala, I spent years shrinking myself, apologizing for taking space, apologizing for aging, apologizing for being ordinary. Not anymore. I started teaching free sewing classes twice a week at a local community center. Young women attended, single mothers attended. Even retired men came wanting to learn basic tailoring, and every class reminded me that purpose does not disappear with age. Sometimes it only begins later. One evening, nearly 6 months after the gala, Nathan came over carrying a small wrapped box. "What's this?" I asked suspiciously. "Open it." Inside rested a silver nameplate. Elegant, simple, beautifully engraved. Eleanor Whitmore, Foundation Advisor. I looked up in confusion. Nathan smiled nervously. Harrison Technologies created a new mentorship foundation. My throat tightened already. It helps support working class students entering business and trade careers. He swallowed hard. "And Charles asked if you'd help lead it." Tears filled my eyes instantly. Not because of the title, not because of recognition, but because my son looked proud saying my name again. Truly proud. "You know," Nathan said quietly, "for years I thought success meant becoming someone different." I waited silently, but now his voice cracked slightly. "I think success is becoming someone your family can still recognize." I reached for his hand gently, and in that moment, I realized something beautiful. The gala was never the real turning point. Neither was the speech. The real turning point happened the moment my son stopped being ashamed of love. As for me, I no longer feared growing older because age had finally given me something wealth never could: my voice, my dignity, and the understanding that no life built on sacrifice is ever small. And if someone listening to my story feels invisible tonight, I hope you remember this. The world may overlook quiet people, but quiet people are often the ones holding the world together. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every story here reminds us that respect, love, and family matter more than money or status. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own child was ashamed of your humble life? I read as many comments as I can, and your story might inspire someone else who feels invisible today. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next emotional story of family, betrayal, strength, and second chances. Because sometimes one story can change the way we see the people we love forever.